Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu, and with me is Renuka, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. India heads for robust economic growth with world's fastest growing startup ecosystem, says Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Inaugurates Semicon India Conference 2022 in Bengaluru. India and Bhutan jointly inaugurate two projects and a bus terminal financed by India. Indian naval ship INS Ghadial reaches Colombo with critical medical aid amid ongoing crisis in Sri Lanka. Army Chief General Manoj Naravane says there has been a rise in incidents of military equipment from Afghanistan being seized in Kashmir. China readies permit return of some Indian students stranded in India following visa and flight restrictions imposed by Beijing due to COVID-19 pandemic. And in Asia Badminton Championships at Manila, India's two-time Olympic medalist and former world champion PV Sindhu cruises into semi-final round of women's singles. Prime Minister Narendra Modi today inaugurated Semicon India Conference 2022 through video conferencing. The three-day event is taking place in Bengaluru. Speaking on this occasion, Prime Minister underlined the critical role of semiconductors in today's world and said that our collective aim is to establish India as one of the key partners in global semiconductor supply chains. He said India wants to work in this direction based on the principle of high tech, high quality, and high reliability. During the program, the Prime Minister underlined 6 reasons for India being an attractive investment destination for semiconductor technologies. First, India is building a digital infrastructure to connect over 1.3 billion Indians. Describing the strides that India has recently made in the field of financial inclusion, banking and digital payment revolution, the Prime Minister said that India is using digital technology to transform lives in all sectors of governance, from health and welfare to inclusion and empowerment. Mr. Modi said, with steps like connecting 600,000 villages with broadband, investment in developing capabilities in 5G, IoT and clean energy technologies, India is paving the way to lead the next technology revolution. Thirdly, India is headed for robust economic growth with the world's fastest growing startup ecosystem. India's own consumption of semiconductors is expected to cross $80 billion by 2026 and $110 billion by 2030. In today's hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on India's push for a robust and resilient semiconductor industry. In conversation are Pranay Kotasane, semiconductor policy expert, and Prasoon Srivastava, journalist.
We begin our interaction, and today we heard our Honorable Prime Minister inaugurating Semiconductor India Conference, and this was the first time a Prime Minister spoke to semiconductor industry. And with a bold message that India is ready for semiconductor, he asked companies to come and engage with India. India wants to be a major partner in the global semiconductor ecosystem. So, Mr. Prana, how do you see today's message from the Prime Minister to the industry and the world?
Today's message was a very positive one. I would add that India is already a major player in the semiconductor ecosystem because India is really a semiconductor design powerhouse. So most of the major world semiconductor companies do have their design centers in India. So a lot of development in semiconductors is done through Indian minds and Indian talent. So that's the starting point. What the message government is sending now is that we want not just the Indian talent to run this industry, but we also want to build some part of this ecosystem end to end, right? So that is not just have presence of great talent, but we also want companies, semiconductor design companies which are Indian. We also want semiconductor fabrication units, and that is manufacturing units based out of India. we also want assembly and packaging to happen out of India. So the government push is towards this vision that a lot of this entire value chain, currently we are just doing one part of the value chain, but the vision is that over time become a player throughout this semiconductor value chain. So that's the message, and the Prime Minister said so that all the government initiatives are focused towards covering this entire value chain, and that's what is distinct from previous approaches where we were trying to be a player only in one segment.
Mr. Pran, I would like to understand from you. Prime Minister said that it is very critical to have a semiconductor industry here in India. Can you elaborate on why semiconductor is required and why this much push is coming from the government?
Semiconductors are really important for the current geopolitics, current technology, and current geoeconomics. So I call semiconductors as being metacritical. And why are they critical? So let's think of it from a technological imperative, right? So whether you're talking about artificial intelligence, whether you're talking about 5G or 6G communication, or you're talking about autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, all these are finally based on having advanced semiconductors, right? So because semiconductors are finally the brains of all the computers, of anything which does computing, right? Whether it's your mobile phone or whether it is your computer or even whether it is your speaker, right? So all these things have semiconductors in them. So there is a technological imperative that if India wants to succeed in critical and emerging technologies going forward, one really critical component of that is to secure our access to semiconductors, because if that is in jeopardy, then the entire critical and emerging supply chain becomes risky. So an example of that is just what US did to China and Huawei in recent years. Because Huawei and because of the US-China trade war, US blocked Huawei access to semiconductors, and that has significantly slowed down its progress on a lot of fronts. So that is just an example to tell you why semiconductors are really important for development of other critical and emerging technologies. So this is the technological imperative. The second one is the geopolitical significance. The unique thing about the semiconductor industry is the peculiar supply chain. Because this is such a complex process, no one country can do the entire thing and be completely self-sufficient. So what has happened is certain countries have become very good in one small part of the entire supply chain, while other countries have specialized in others, right? So what that has done is, on one hand, it has led to massive development and progress of the industry, but also on the other hand, it means that if one country decides to block access of a particular technology to a particular company, then the entire supply chain sort of unravels. That's why this peculiarity of supply chain means that all countries now want to at least have dominance over certain parts of the supply chain so that no other country can deny access to them. They will also have a bargaining chip in return. So that's why a lot of geopolitical element has come into semiconductors in recent years. The big driver of this is Taiwan. If you see, Taiwan is the place where almost all of world's leading edge ICs are made in that country, and China and Taiwan relations are worsening. So there's a great fear that what if China were to occupy Taiwan and Taiwan's semiconductor industry goes bust? If that happens, the repercussions will be felt for everyone, whether you're buying an electric vehicle, whether you're buying your next computer, you will feel the shortage of that. We are already seeing some elements of it because of COVID-19 and related supply chain disruptions. So that's why there's a geopolitical significance of semiconductors which has come to the fore. And finally, there is a geoeconomic imperative. Like I said, because the supply chain is complex with only one company or one country specializing in small bit of the entire supply chain, which is still very critical, and that's why there are business continuity risks. What happens if that company is delayed? What happens if that company goes down, right? So that's why the effort of a lot of countries is being to build a resilient supply chain. That is, find out alternatives to this very lean but very risky supply chain where there is just one supplier for a particular element.
When you talk about dependency on other country or particular geography, If we see the ecosystem of electronics, we are dependent on several countries, like for even the raw materials, for even the metals. Also, if you look at the Apple list of vendors, it is spread across the globe. So in case of semiconductor, how are India is dependent on foreign countries?
If you look at the entire supply chain, the first step is semiconductor design. So in design, we have a lot of trained engineers who are virtually the backbone of a lot of top semiconductor companies. But as I said, a lot of the intellectual property of these companies is not with Indian firms, right? So these are companies, American companies or Taiwanese companies who have set shop in India, and they have access to Indian talent, and Indian engineers design a lot of semiconductors. Now we are beginning to see a few companies which are emerging out of India and are Indian in terms of their intellectual property as well. So that's beginning to be seen, but it's still not a large section of the industry. So that's one. We are on the next stage where we talk about semiconductor manufacturing. There we are completely dependent on other countries because we don't have any commercial semiconductor fab in the country. We do have one fab which does a limited amount of manufacturing for ISRO and space-related applications, but we have nothing which, for example, can manufacture a chip which goes into your mobile phone or into your TV. And we are dependent on, like a lot of other countries in the world, we are dependent either on Taiwan or companies, fabs in the US, Israel or Europe. This is the second stage. The third one is the assembly, test, marking and packaging segment. Now this is a labor intensive segment where actually India can have a lot of presence, but currently the cost is a prohibitive factor because generally these units are located close to the places where chips are made for cost reasons. So again, these are concentrated very heavily in Taiwan and East Asia. And that's why we don't do much of assembly, testing and packaging as well. So this is how throughout the supply chain, we have comparative advantage in design, but not so much in manufacturing or in assembly, test and packaging.
When we have so many engineers designing semiconductors in India, why not making it?
Manufacturing is a totally different ballgame. It's not just that India is not doing it. In fact, many countries in the world have not been able to do it, right? Because it requires massive capital investment. It requires knowledge decades. So, for example, Taiwan does it, but Taiwan has been able to do it over 40 years, So there has been a lot of development which has gone behind it. So I am sure India will also be able to do it. It's just a matter of time. But we have to also see that the hardware industry is different from the software industry in the sense that, these manufacturing units, for example, the latest one that TSMC is establishing in the US costs around $12 billion of investment. And then the returns from them the first it will be made only 4 or 5 years later, So the companies have to have faith in the business environment of a country. They need to have faith in the tax environment of the country, of the trade environment of the country. And India until now has not been able to provide that confidence to the big players. So they have stayed away from India and prefer to just do design here and not do manufacturing here.
We have talent pool here who are designing like 2,000 chips every year. That is what the government shared today. It has learned from the industry. 2,000 chips are being designed in India. You see, the Intel, when they made the Pentium processor, it was mostly Indian engineers who led the team. Mr. Vinod Tham was there. Even our Minister of State for Electronics and IT was part of that team. There were several engineers involved. Now, government is also saying that they will provide all the incentives. So which are the major hiccups or obstacles that you see are there which needs to be addressed by the government and the industry to start manufacturing it?
The important message that the government is sending is it's not just that we have to only do manufacturing, but we need to have presence throughout the supply chain in some measure. All right. So that's one thing. In manufacturing, the biggest hiccup until now was, as I said, there was lack of confidence in the industry on policy continuity. There were fears, $12 billion or $5 billion, and suddenly the policy might change, doing business might become difficult, tax laws might change, so they prefer to stay out. So right now the government's message has been, and that's what the PM said, the government wants to become an and gate rather than a not gate in the past. What he's trying to convey is that whatever policies government provides now, there will be some policy continuity. The government has made an upfront capital investment of a significant sum for manufacturing. So what the government is saying that we won't reimburse you for your investment. In fact, we will co-develop the manufacturing facility with you. So the government is ready to put money on the capital expenditure right up front, which was conveyed to me as by some as one big reason why they won't invest in India, because there was no upfront capital commitment from the government. So that has changed. That was one major hiccup. I think another major hiccup is this idea of our trade policy. If there is a rise in import duties, etc., then all these companies depend on extensive imports and exports. So they are very globally linked. If there is a sudden raise in import prices on semiconductor equipment or chips, etc., then they will have difficulty doing business. So I guess that is one more thing to be paid attention to. And the government's idea is that now they are fully behind this. They are willing to give a lot of incentives and policy support, which would make that idea of a semiconductor fab in India come true now.
And how much is our requirement of semiconductors in India?
Requirement is way greater than what we'll be able to manufacture. So I don't want to go into the numbers because they'll be just too large. But what I can say is that it's not as if once we build 2 or 3 fabs in India, all our chips and all our mobile phones will be manufactured in India itself. That's not what's going to happen. But what is going to happen is probably what we need is critical defense equipment where you don't need advanced edge chips. There we'll be able to have critical backup. Also for critical other technologies, maybe space, etc., we'll be able to have a supply chain which is completely Indian. But for commercial and consumer electronics, we'll buy from outside, which is fine. There is no need for us to become fully self-dependent. No country can, and that will be the case with India also.
So we have started our roadmap towards semiconductor, and there are issues, but government is now very positive. As you said about that, we need a stable tax regime and the policy. Prime Minister today promised that there has been proactive policy, there have been supportive policy, and it's the most tax-friendly country now for the investors. Thank you, Mr. Pranay, for talking to us. Thank you for the insight, and I hope that country comes together to help government build the semiconductor ecosystem here.
India and Bhutan today jointly inaugurated 2 projects and a bus terminal which are being financed by India. The project was launched in the presence of External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar. The External Affairs Minister arrived in Bhutan after completing his visit to Bangladesh. Mr. Jaishankar also called upon Bhutanese Prime Minister Lote Tshering and apprised him of the progress in bilateral cooperation, including development partnership. Mr. Jaishankar also held talks with Finance Minister of Bhutan covering hydropower, connectivity, trade space, health and digital issues. On the occasion, the minister also handed over the 12 medical consignment as a gift from the Government of India. Dr. Jaishankar arrived in Dhaka yesterday and called on Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. He later held a meeting with Bangladesh Foreign Minister Dr. A.K. Abdul Momen in Dhaka. Dr. Jaishankar extended Prime Minister Narendra Modi's invitation to Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to visit India. During the meeting, both the leaders discussed issues of mutual interest as well as regional and global issues of importance. With the overarching aim of providing critical medical aid to Sri Lanka during the ongoing crisis, INS Ghadial, as part of Mission Sagar 9 today, reached Colombo. It delivered over 760 kilograms of 107 types of critical life-saving medicines. The shipment was received by Sri Lankan Health Minister Channa Jayasumana. In line with government's vision of Sagar, security and growth for all in the region, the Indian Navy undertakes several deployments titled Mission Sagar to assist friendly countries. Since May 2020, the Indian Navy has successfully concluded 8 such missions, deploying 10 ships to 18 friendly foreign countries. With the steadfast intent of delivering a high quantum of humanitarian assistance to neighbors, Personnel from ships and shore organizations of the Indian Navy have invested close to 1 million man-hours to bring succor to our friends in overseas.
Sri Lanka's president has agreed to replace his elder brother as Prime Minister in a proposed interim government to solve a political impasse caused by the country's worst economic crisis in decades. According to the lawmakers, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa agreed that a national council will be appointed to name a new Prime Minister and cabinet comprised of all parties in parliament, lawmaker Maithripala Sirisena said after meeting with the president. Sirisena, who was president before Rajapaksa, was a governing party lawmaker before defecting earlier this month along with nearly 40 other legislators. Sri Lanka is near bankruptcy and has announced it is suspending payments on its foreign loans. It has to repay $7 billion in foreign debt this year and $25 billion by 2026. Its foreign reserves stand at less than $1 billion. The foreign exchange shortage has severely limited imports, forcing people to wait in long lines to buy essentials such as food, fuel, cooking gas and medicine. China has said that it is ready to permit the return of some Indian students stranded in India for over 2 years following the visa and flight restrictions imposed by Beijing due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian told a media briefing in Beijing today that China attaches high importance to Indian students' concerns about returning to China for studies. However, he has not given any timeline for their return. He said the Chinese embassy in India and existing channels will work to facilitate and offer convenience to the students. Over 20,000 Indian students could not return to China due to the restrictions imposed by the Chinese government to arrest the spread of the virus. A report from our Beijing correspondent.
It's positive news for more than 20,000 Indian students who have been waiting for their return to China for the last 2 years. After External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar's meeting with the Chinese Foreign Minister in New Delhi last month and persistent follow-up by the Indian Embassy in Beijing, the Chinese government has finally agreed to facilitate the return of Indian students. However, it may be seen as a show of intent at this moment, and students waiting to return may have to wait for some time for their actual return. As the Indian Embassy will send the list to Chinese side, they will verify, so a lot of work is still to be done. Apart from this, there are thousands of Indians who have been separated from their families for the last 2 years, and it is yet to be seen when they can return to China to reunite with their families. Anshuman Mishra, AIR News, Beijing.
Talking exclusively to Prasar Bharati Beijing, many Indian residents in Beijing welcomed the decision and expressed hope that both Chinese and Indian sides can work together to allow their family members to return who have been separated for the last 2 years.
On a personal note, I would like to highlight that there are many Indians in China who have been separated from our families for the past 2 years. This has been very tough on us. This decision has raised our hope that eventually both the Indian and the Chinese governments will consider the humanitarian aspect of our plight and pave the way for our families to return to China and get reunited with us. चीन के विदेश मंत्रालय द्वारा लिया गया ये फैसला भारतीय छात्रों के लिए जो चीन के विश्वविद्यालय और कॉलेजों में पढ़ाई कर रहे थे और पिछले 2 सालों से वापस नहीं आ पाए हैं, उनके लिए काफी उत्साहवर्धक है और मैं उम्मीद करता हूं कि वो यहाँ आ पाएंगे और अपनी पढ़ाई पूरी कर पाएंगे। ये फैसला दरअसल ऐसे कई भारतीयों के लिए उत्साहवर्धक है जिनके परिवार पिछले 2 सालों से उनसे जुदा है और हम उम्मीद करते हैं कि दोनों सरकारें, भारत की और चीन की, इसको एक ह्यूमैनिटेरियन तरीके से कंसिडर करके एक फैसला लेंगे।
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Army Chief General Manoj Naravane said there has been a rise in incidents of military equipment from Afghanistan being seized in Kashmir. He said when the previous Taliban regime was there in Afghanistan in the early 2000s, the army had captured or killed Afghan terrorists in Kashmir also. General Naravane said this during the Raisina dialogue, a video of which was released yesterday. The army chief said, while there has been no spillover of manpower so far this time, but there is definitely a movement in that direction. He said there is definitely an increase in the number of weapons and other equipment, especially night vision devices, that the army is capturing or unearthing, which definitely have come from Afghanistan. Responding to a question on ongoing war in Ukraine, General Naravane said it has forced a rethink of certain military assumptions. In Germany, lawmakers voted yesterday to send heavy weapons and complex machinery to Ukraine. The petition passed with 586 votes in favor, 100 against and 7 abstentions. The vote in the lower house of parliament represents a historic shift in policy for Germany after the government held off for weeks on sending heavy equipment.
The U.S. economy shrank in the first 3 months of the year and faces threats from high inflation and rising interest rates. According to media reports, the first quarterly decline in gross domestic product since the pandemic hit in 2020, a 1.4% drop on an annualized basis. On the other hand, rising wages bolstered spending by households and higher profits drove investment by companies. The job market also remains robust, with the unemployment rate near a 50-year low of 3.6% and wages rising steadily. Last month, prices jumped 8.5% from a year earlier, the fastest such rise in 4 decades. And now, a report from the business world.
Sensex tumbled by 460 points, 0.8% to close at 57,061, while the Nifty plunged 143 points, 0.83% to finish at 17,103. In the global share markets, most Asian stocks climbed, following overnight gains in the US share markets. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index jumped 4% and China's Shanghai Composite Index rose 2.4%. South Korea's Kospi gained 1% and Singapore's Straits Times Index ended 0.7% up. Trade did not take place in Japan's Nikkei 225 due to a holiday. European share markets were also up in intraday trade. Brent crude oil prices rose around 2% amid supply worries due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. However, caution about the fall in oil demand in China due to the economic impact of COVID-19 restrictions capped the gains. In intraday trade, Brent crude was trading around $109.50 per barrel. Back home, gold prices rose by 580 rupees at the multi-commodity exchange for June contracts. The precious metal was trading at 51,840 rupees per 10 grams. Silver prices also gained by 615 rupees to 64,535 rupees per kilogram for May contracts when reports last came in. And in the foreign exchange market, the rupee appreciated by 6 paise against the US dollar. The domestic currency finished at 76 rupees and 43 paise against the American unit. Arjun Chaudhary for World News All India Radio.
Dance is not just an art, it is a power to express, feel, love, laugh, and forget all the worries. Dance has always been a way to make someone feel good. From ancient times, it is said to be an art form that is sacred and has a meaning deep inside. There are hundreds of dance forms in the world. To celebrate this diversity, the Dance Committee of the International Theatre Institute, the main partner for the performing arts of the UNESCO, started celebrating 29th of April as International Dance Day. It was first announced by the International Dance Council in 1982. The day also marks the birthday of the creator of the modern ballet dance form, Jean-Georges Navarre. While there is no particular time or day to celebrate dance and tap the feet on the beats, this day is special as it recognizes dancers from all over the world and joins them together for their love of art. In Asia Badminton Championships in Manila, India's two-time Olympic medalist and former world champion PV Sindhu today cruised into the semi-final round of women's singles. She defeated fifth-seeded He Beijiao of China in 1 hour 16 minutes thriller quarter-final 21-9, 13-21 and 21-19.
A quick look at the headlines once again. India heads for robust economic growth with world's fastest growing startup ecosystems as Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurates Semicon India Conference 2022 in Bengaluru. India and Bhutan jointly inaugurate 2 projects and a bus terminal financed by India. Indian naval ship INS Ghadial reaches Colombo with critical medical aid amid ongoing crisis in Sri Lanka. Army Chief General Manoj Naravane says there has been a rise in incidents of military equipment from Afghanistan being seized in Kashmir. China ready to permit return of some Indian students stranded in India following visa and flight restrictions imposed by Beijing due to COVID-19 pandemic. And in Asia Badminton Championships at Manila, India's 2-time Olympic medalist and former world champion PV Sindhu cruises into semi-final round of women's singles. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan Vaishnav Jan by artists from Bhutan.
वैष्णव जन को तेने कहिए जे पीर पराए जाने रे पर दुखे
And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.